Hey, so today I'm just going to go over a question from a viewer regarding what type of race pattern should a 100-meter sprinter have if they are stride frequency dominant versus stride length dominant. So I would first start off by saying that, well, before you can answer that question, you have to ask a different question, and that would be, how should a stride frequency or stride length dominant sprinter train? And if you can answer that question, then it's a lot easier to answer how they should have like their 100-meter race pattern. Because I think that if you get the training right, then the race pattern will fall into place. But to ask that question and to answer that, as far as how should they train, for one, the very first thing is that it depends on their development stage. If a sprinter is elite, and if they are intermediate or a beginner, it's all going to depend a little bit on that. Certainly, I would say the way to answer the question is, are you going to focus more on your strengths or on your weaknesses? And again, that's going to depend on your stage of development. Generally, a beginner has, well, everything's a weakness for beginners. Even if they are one type versus another, they're still not near their potential at anything they're doing. So everything's a weakness, and you're just constantly working on those things. As they become intermediates, you start seeing what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are, and you can really see usually a differentiation at that point. And by the time they're elite, they would have very few weaknesses. But there's still some usually. But for the most part, when an athlete is fully developed, they're fully mature, especially if they're just an elite level, then they're going to have, very dominant, very high strengths. And so certainly a fully developed athlete like that should lean towards their strengths. Like if you're a great starter, you should lean on that strength. Of course, working on your weaknesses a little bit here and there, but if you're one of the greatest starters in the world, you can't neglect that. You have to use that as an advantage. And same thing if you were a better finisher, speed endurance, back half of the race type of person, then you need to focus on that. Again, it's not to say that you don't work on those other things at that level, but the priority is to be the best at least something. When you're an intermediate athlete, that's where you work on both the most. You got to work on your strengths. You got to keep developing those. You got to figure out what those are still. But you also need to cover your weaknesses and try to minimize those. Like I said, beginner, everything's a weakness. So they need to work on everything, and they're going to usually benefit from just about anything that they do if they're in their first couple of years of training. So with that being said, it's interesting how some athletes can have very high frequencies and still have great speed endurance. You look at guys like Michael Johnson, has one of the highest step frequencies of all time, really. And he was an endurance-based guy. He was not a great starter. On the flip side, you have guys who are big and long and great starters, but maybe not the best finishers. There's several of those out there. Guys like Jacobs, I would consider one. I would consider someone like probably Asaf Pal as well. Great starter, not the best finisher, but quite a bit of stride length there, lankier type of an athlete compared some of the shorter, stocky guys. So what I'm trying to say is there's exceptions to the rule. I think that the most important thing in considering what you should focus on is make sure that you're viewing the individual athlete as a unique individual. Because again, there are going to be situations where you think somebody's this stride length person, and maybe they are, but maybe they're a first half of the race type of person though. So everybody's a bit different. But sure, generally the longer athletes who have stride length are going to be better finishers. Generally, the shorter, stocky sprinters are going to be better accelerators, first half of the race people. Yeah, for sure, that's typical. What I'm saying is don't automatically write people off though and say, okay, this person is built this way and they have these characteristics, so this is the pattern they should have. I think it's important not to shoebox people into one category. You have to keep everything open because there's always going to be nuance. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule, no matter what. And as a coach, you have to adjust for those things and avoid a one-size-fits-all approach, in my opinion. So with that being said, I think that over time, you will find what type of race pattern they should have and how that should be developed. If the training fits the individual and you are capitalizing on their weaknesses or capitalizing on their strengths at the same time, trying to minimize and work on those weaknesses and chip away at those, then you're going to find, what works best for the athlete over time. And so to just really get direct with the question, I would say that regardless if someone is a stride length person, stride frequency, speed endurance, or an acceleration type of an athlete, I think regardless, you want to make sure that you have as effective of an acceleration as possible. Notice I use the word effective instead of just fast or quick. Generally, a faster start is going to be better. However, it depends on how that is being accomplished. It's the context. If someone is chopping their stride too much in order to get a quicker 10, 20 meter start, it very may well harm them by the end of the race, It could hinder them from reaching their actual top end speed because they're sacrificing biomechanical positions, right? So it would be the same thing with someone who's over pushing and they're trying to really extend too much. You might be able to kind of get some benefit from that the last couple of strides of a race because you're bounding towards the finish line, but that's likely going to hinder your acceleration. So it's, I think, important just to realize that regardless of the athlete, you want to make sure that the start is effective, it's efficient. You are ultimately trying to reach as high of a top speed as possible. If you're able to do that with your start, then you've pretty much done your job at that point. I don't think that, a stride length person should volitionally, actively try to hold back at the start and save even more for the end. I'm not a fan of that idea. That doesn't mean that the athlete shouldn't be patient and then it shouldn't be progressive and fairly gradual in terms of their acceleration. But it means that you shouldn't be trying to hold back in a race like 100 meters. I think that if you hold back too much, you're probably just going to sink a little bit. Your hips are going to drop. If you're not applying as much power as you can, you're not going to get extension. If you're not applying as much power as you can, you're going to have longer ground contact times. Like, it's bad for everything, You're not going to have a good posture if you're holding back too much. You're going to be coming out more like a, distance runner, essentially, if that makes sense. Like, the positions are different, So you need to make sure that you are, applying maximum force to get maximum speed. to have, the best possible acceleration to set up maximum velocity. Charlie Francis gave a good example about people who try to hold back at the start and, try to maybe add or save more for the end in a short sprint. And it's like taking the end of one blanket off, cutting it off to make the other side longer. You didn't actually make the blanket longer. You just kind of, shifted things unnecessarily. And in fact, it could cause damage or a hindrance, if anything. So, at the end of the day, if you are able to get a good start, you're at X plus 1. Whereas your competition, is at X, right? So why not have that advantage if you can do it? But again, it's not chopping things up unnaturally, artificially. It's not cutting your air time too short, because that's a popular thing I see these days. A lot of people are cutting their air time short in order to increase stride frequency. But you want to really decrease ground contact time to at least in a progressive, reasonable way. I'm not saying to stop, the stride midway or anything to try to pull your foot off the ground before you're finished with extending. Again, everything has to be in the proper balance, and some individuals are going to vary. Some people are going to need initially longer ground contact times. Some people are going to need to have fairly low ground contact times the whole way. But whatever is best for the athlete, you're going to have to just really watch and make sure that nothing kind of goofy is going on. But for the most part, if they are moving in a natural pattern, then things are going to work out. So, regardless if you're a fast or slow starter, there is a difference, I think, between a fast starter and a good starter. Some people, again, they freewheel and can get out to 20 meters really fast, even a little further maybe, 30 or 40. But if they are, again, sacrificing their technique just to get out quick, they're likely to really suffer the second half. I mean, we see this all the time, especially at the world-class level. Because keep in mind, the 60 meters indoor sprint, the 60 meters for an elite athlete, especially males we're talking about, they reach their top speed at 50 or 60 meters. So basically that whole race is acceleration, essentially. So they don't even need to necessarily hit their true top end speed in order to perform quite well at that race. I think this is one reason we see a lot of guys running around 6'5", which is certainly fast, and we even see guys break 6'5". They go 6'4", but they can't break 10 seconds in the 100. There's a slew of guys we've seen do that. So, part of that is because they're sacrificing their mechanics in that 60. They're forcing things. They're cutting their air time short. They're cutting their ground time too short for the most part. You can get out and accelerate pretty quick that way, but it's going to affect once you hit 60, 70, 80. That's where it really starts catching up to you. So regardless, if you're more stride frequency dominant or stride length dominant, I think it's important not to get into that habit. Now for intermediate or beginners, if they're running the 60 meters, then you're likely going to be reaching top end speed, because you're going to accelerate only about maybe 30 meters, give or take, depending on your level. But you're going to reach your top end speed for that second half of the 60 meter dash. So it's going to even show up and catch up to you at the lower levels. So, you're going to definitely want to have the same 60 meter race pattern as you do for the 100. Again, at the elite level, you can kind of cheat in that 60, but you're going to have a different race pattern if you want to perform to your best in the 100 at the elite level. So, my philosophy, in my opinion, just the 60 should prepare you for the 100, and I don't believe in trying to cheat, and by I mean cheat, by sacrificing your technique for maybe a couple hundredths or a tenth or something faster in the 60. It's just then by the time you go outdoor, you got a lot of work to do. You got to repattern yourself. It's difficult, and people get injured from doing that. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So, but at any rate, yeah, again, whether you're stride length or stride frequency, you really should run in a way that's best for you. And you shouldn't sacrifice your start or your mechanics during your start to be quicker. You shouldn't be sacrificing your effort level and holding back at the start, regardless if you're either of those. So those are the general guidelines that I would give for athletes who are trying to figure out what type of race pattern they are. But it all starts in training. If you're doing things right in training, then eventually the pattern will come to you and you won't have to force yourself into a specific pattern. And that goes to the long old advice of run your own race. So if you can run your own race, you can get your athletes to run their own race, then at the end of the day, things will work out. So hope that answers your question. I'll be back pretty soon. I know I had another question. Next one will be regarding starts. So look forward to get back to that soon. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day.